Good afternoon, another short VR. This time to the CaninePiper. His question was where, give an event in time and describe where you were, how it affected you. And he brought up 9/11. And he mentioned he was 8 years old. Holy cow, I feel old now. Where was I on 9/11? At the time, I worked in an engineering department for a company that produced equipment for the poultry industry. And I was in engineering, research and development. I was kind of focused and specialized in the watering portion of that development. And I was out of state. I was not in Indiana at the time. I was in Michigan, up near Fremont, Michigan. We would travel to these corporate farms, which are really located out in the boondocks. And I was at a turkey farm on 9/11. And it was a beautiful day in Michigan as well. And on 9/11, we had gotten up early and there was a crew of us. We met out at the turkey farm and we were installing some new prototype equipment. Some of us were working on feeders, some of us were working on waterers, and we had a couple hours into the day when one of the engineers that was with us decided to run into town and pick up some hardware because we had forgotten some hardware that was needed to finish, to continue on with the job. And a turkey barn, the one I was in, was probably 50 foot wide and 700-800 feet long. Totally empty, no birds in it, just us. And I was about 2/3 of the way down the barn, away from what we would call the front end of the barn. The engineer got back and called up some of the other engineers that were there, which is not unusual. We were all working and sometimes they would have to figure things out. And they called everybody up to the front of the barn. And the fellow that was in charge kind of explained what he had heard on the radio. Now, pre-9/11, you have to understand how foreign terrorism was to the United States. Such a difficult concept to grasp. And he told us, I'll never forget, he told us, he said, "I think we're at war." And we were all like, what? What are you talking about? We're at war. I mean, there was nothing on the horizon that led us to believe that our nation was going to war. And it just was a totally different world. And so I'll never forget, he had a TV, a little black and white TV that you could plug into the lighter. And we plugged it into the lighter in the console, and it was very, just a real grainy image. This was before smartphones, before, none of us had smartphones. We might have had a flip phone for the crew. And we were all doing our best to huddle around that little S10 Blazer when the first tower came down. And we had no concept of what was happening. And so we went back to work, believe it or not. We're out in the middle of nowhere. We went back to work and we worked through the day, none of us thinking anything about it. And when we got home, or not home, but when we got done with the job and went back to the hotel, then it began to dawn on us. Messages from family members trying to get a hold of us. The videos that we were some of the few Americans that never watched all of those events take place live. We were watching the videos of those events. And I remember walking down to the payphone trying to call home because we couldn't use our cell phones, and not being able to get hold of our family. And the realization that indeed our country was at war and we were out of state. And we began to talk about, you know, this was early in the week, it was Tuesday, we were supposed to be at this job all week. And you get a bunch of younger men, family men, from the heartland of this nation who were passionate about families, and we were demanding to go home, and we were trying to figure, and you know, God bless the guys that were in charge of us because they kept their heads, and we had no idea. I mean, trying to get a hold of family where our family's safe, even in Indiana. And then just realizing that how odd it was, you know, no planes flying overhead, and what's happening. We all knew that our lives were changed forever. And we stayed the entire week up in Fremont, came home on a Friday. And I remember getting home and sitting on my bed listening to my wife just share the experiences of having witnessed all of that live on TV, and just how society and life in general, everybody just shut down. While we continued to work, you know, 95% of the country was just shut down and was just watching TV and trying to figure out what was happening. And I remember thinking, I've missed a huge event. And I remember just watching as much TV as I could. You know, I think I had dial-up internet at the time. And our country changed forever. And then the realization, you know, that my children have really never known a nation that has not been not at war. We've always been at war. And how, you know, reflecting back on that, how different I responded to that, thinking, because we had never, I grew up in peace and America was so strong, and who would ever strike at us on our home turf? And life is definitely different now, you know. It's a lot different for my family, a lot different for my kids. A lot different for me. A lot has happened. A lot has happened. So CaninePiper, there's your answer to your question. I was at a turkey farm in Fremont, Michigan, the day the towers came down. And I missed it all, the majority of it, because I had no clue what was going on. Who's your piper?